Welcome back, everybody, after what must have seemed a very short break, and it's so we can cram even more into this marvellous day. So I was thinking, reflecting on the very rich and different presentations we had this morning, that it calls into question, I think we've even called this conference sort of past, present and future, but I was thinking that a lot of the papers show us that thinking in terms of a continuum of time, past, present and future, isn't particularly useful when it comes to the area of women's rights, that the past lives in the present and the future is already here. So it's perhaps one issue that feminists need to think about is how to conceive of the idea of progress, and mapping it to an idea of time may not be the most useful way ahead. But we're moving from the reflections we've had in the morning now very much to the present. And I should have acknowledged right at the beginning of our session this morning that today, apart from being the day of our conference, has worldwide significance because it's the International Day of Persons with Disabilities, and a very significant day and a matter of both reflection and celebration. So I'm particularly delighted then to be introducing our next session, where our very much valued and respected colleagues from the University of New South Wales, Rosemary Kayess and Andrew Byrnes, are in conversation. Both of them, of course, Andrew doesn't mention this in the interview, he was far too modest. Both of them are critical players in the development of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So we feel very fortunate. What richness UNSW has to have these two colleagues. And it's a pre-record with the advantages and the disadvantages of that. So there won't be the possibility of live interaction, although I hope that perhaps both of those speakers might be around and could respond to questions if you want to put them into the chat. So now I'm going to hand over to our wonderful technology wizards who will produce Rosemary Kayess in conversation with Andrew Byrnes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Andrew Byrnes. I'm from the University of New South Wales Law Faculty and the Australian Human Rights Institute at UNSW. I'm very pleased to welcome you this afternoon to a conversation with my esteemed friend and colleague, Rosemary Kayess. As you all know, Rosemary is a leading international expert, scholar, researcher, teacher, advocate, leader, and other things in the field of human rights, and in particular in the field of disability rights. So it's a great opportunity for me to catch up with her and for all of us to catch up with Rosemary to talk about what the current issues are in relation to the human rights of women and girls with disabilities in Australia and internationally. As you will have heard this morning, the Beijing Conference, of course, was not a one-off. It was at the centre, or perhaps near the end, of a trajectory of an exciting series of international conferences that actually brought much activity, much networking and much policy change. In the field of women's rights, from the Mexico City Conference of 1975 through Copenhagen, where the CEDAW Convention was open for signature, to the Nairobi Conference with its forward-looking strategies, and then finally the Beijing Conference in 1995. Preceded, of course, by the very important conference, the Vienna World Conference on Human Rights in Vienna in 1993, at which women's human rights was a central element. And as many of you will recall, the slogan, "Women's rights are human rights," entered very much firmly into the international human rights lexicon. Our session today is meant to focus on the present challenges and opportunities, but I'll be first asking Rosemary to contextualise some of the work on the human rights of women and girls with disabilities in the context of Beijing and other events from the 1990s. So now, Rosemary, welcome, and thank you for agreeing to talk to us once again. And let me perhaps open with a question about the central topic of this conference, the Beijing Platform, Declaration and Platform for Action. And it's a question really about what did the Beijing Conference and the Platform for Action mean to you and other human rights activists working on disability issues at the time? And what else was going on in terms of international efforts to advance the rights of persons with disabilities? And what does it mean now? Is this the framework that people are using? Have other things supplanted it? Where is the action in terms of normative and policy action around the human rights of women and girls with disabilities?
Thank you, Andrew. It's always good to have a conversation with you. Look, for me personally, at the time I was embarking on a PhD, and that PhD was focused around discrimination law, and a lot of people with disability in Australia at the time, the DDA was a new shiny thing that was to be the instrument that was going to deliver us our rights and eliminate discrimination. And so it was the central focus really here in Australia for people with disability. And for me personally and professionally, that's where my focus was at the time. That doesn't mean that Beijing didn't have a role there. Internationally, women with disability did, from around the world, went to Beijing and fought the barriers that were there to actually be included and be heard, and to raise the rights of women with disability and their issues and concerns for women and girls with disability within that platform. That created a space and a recognition at the time, but it's never been what you would say an automatic place where women with disability are embraced and their voices are heard. So domestically, it didn't really mean very much. Internationally, it was a starting point of where women with disability engaged with the women's sector and started to make incremental steps into that space. And we're still today trying to make a little bit more space and a bit more ground in that area.
So what do you organise your political advocacy and legal advocacy and other educational efforts around? What are the critical frameworks that you use today?
CRPD, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, has generated so much energy within the disability rights movement. It's a reflection of the convention negotiation, because there was such engagement of people with disability in the convention negotiation. The convention speaks our language. It recognises disability, it embraces the notion of the social model of disability, which was, driven by disability scholars and activists in the early 70s, the late 60s and early 70s. And so that convention is really our convention. People with disabilities are very proprietary about that convention. And the one really, really strong thing for women with disability is the fact that CRPD is really strong in intersectionality. It includes general principles that identify, as a general principle for interpretation, equality between men and women. It has a specific article on women with disabilities, which is a facilitation article that is designed specifically to provide a lens to look at all the substantive articles from a gender perspective, and to interrogate the various articles, such as violence and abuse, employment, adequate standard of living with a gender lens. And so it's strong on intersectionality. And so CRPD is really the go-to instrument, but also CDAW. We would operate within the CDAW space as well. And that's got greater relevance to the advocacy and the fight for the recognition of the rights of women and girls with disability.
You've just described the importance and the energy that the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability has brought to the cause. The convention itself now is nearly a decade and a half old, and it's amazingly 2 decades, 20 years since the drafting almost commenced on it. And I'm just wondering, what are the priority issues, or what are the issues which are the focus of advocacy at the national and international level? And has the convention stood the test of time, pretty much, or are there new issues which are emerging, which have needed to be incorporated in those advocacy campaigns within the framework of the convention?
Unfortunately, most of the issues are still the issues that were around with us when we were negotiating the convention. And the issues that continually come up, and I notice this time and time again with state party reviews and individual communications, that it's violence and abuse, it's sexual and reproductive rights, it's rights around autonomy, it's financial security, economic security. So I would say there's not glaring emerging issues that are sort of supplanting ones that have been dealt with, because the other ones haven't really been dealt with. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that women with disability really do have to fight in both spaces. We have to fight to get traction within the disability space, and we have to fight to get traction within the women's space. And so within the disability space, we find ourselves with a committee on the rights of persons with disabilities at one stage that had 1 woman and 17 men. And so we didn't have a body of women speaking about their experiences and having a voice in the discussions of the committee and the analysis of the committee to put a focus on women's rights and women's issues. And so whilst I think there is an energy around CRPD that's unprecedented, there is still a struggle for women with disability to really clearly get their voices and their issues raised to an equal status.
And one of the things I didn't mention in the introduction about your background is, of course, I did mention you're a teacher, but you're a colleague at the Law Faculty of the University of New South Wales. You've also been in the Social Policy Research Centre, the Disability Research Institute, and a leader in the Disability Innovation Institute. And so education and research has been very much part of your professional and activist life, and I suppose it's particularly fitting in the role that you played while an expert member of the Australian delegation negotiating the Convention on the Right to Education, a famously challenging article. Having played a central role in that, I'm sure you've kept an eye on how it's going, and that was also a central concern of Beijing, the education of particularly girls, or the girl child as it was referred to. And how well do you think the promises of that right have been realised so far in Australia and internationally? Because it's the base of so many other life chances and rights.
You are so correct. It's a cornerstone issue, education. And inclusive education is an incredibly important thing. I will note, I don't know whether I would describe it as keeping an eye on it or having it thrust in my face every second day. people do remind me that I was instrumental in the configuration of Article 24. Look, for people with disability in Australia, inclusive education is really not progressing strongly. In fact, if in any way it's going backwards. Inclusive education doesn't have a really good stronghold anywhere in the world. There are pockets, very small pockets, and you could probably count them on one hand, where inclusive education finds itself in a space where there's good leadership and there is a commitment, but they are very small pockets and very few indeed. We're going backwards here, and it's because there isn't the leadership, there's not a strategy, there's no strategic plan to get to inclusive education. And for girls, we have no data. We've got no idea, really, because there's no disaggregated data. We're not getting any understanding of the impact of segregated education on girls with disability. We've got no data, disaggregated data, that gives us any insight to the experience of girls with disability in mainstream education. So without any good data, any good targeted research that, evidence-based, that gives us any insight to the experience of girls with disabilities within the education systems, it's very difficult to be able to embed those issues and concerns into any trajectory for change. So, curriculum and materials continue to reflect accepted stereotypes. They don't have access to curriculum and material that has any positive portrayals of women with disabilities or even girls with disabilities. And so there's nothing they can relate to. There's not a curriculum that they feel part of. And to a lot of extent, that would mean there's an education system that they don't feel part of.
You mentioned earlier, Rosemary, that one of the things we've seen in the modern world is a contracting civil society space and everything from limited opportunities to actual serious crackdowns on the expression of political views. And that's also included women's human rights defenders and a pushback against many women's rights achievements, which were really achievements of the 1990s at Beijing, Vienna, Cairo conferences, but are now been very much under threat, including around things like sexual and reproductive rights, the impact of culture, right to access to education, participation in public life, and so on. So I suppose I'd want to ask you, how has this general contraction of civil space, the pushback against women's rights, played out in relation to the human rights of women and girls with disabilities? And have there been particular or different aspects in that area as well as shared ones?
Well, as I mentioned before, women with disability have always had significant impediments and barriers to being able to participate and engage within the women's rights movement and being able to achieve a voice within that movement. And this has meant that we remain absent in the women's agenda and advocacy. So it's difficult to say that that's about any contraction. That's always been the case. It's been the norm. If anything, a contraction has made it harder for women with disability to maintain a voice in that space or access to that space and be able to put forward their issues and concerns. And I mean, this is reinforced by the siloing of disability and women, especially in the policy context. So here in Australia, we, if it's seen as a disability issue, it's funded by one agency, and if it's a women's issue, it's funded by another agency, and never the twain shall meet. And that's true for policy as well. So a piece of policy will either focus gender neutrally on disability issues, or it will focus disability neutral on women's issues. In terms of sexual and reproductive rights, there's been a contraction because it's not a contraction because, as I said, there's been no traction. Women with disability are seen as, asexual. Their experiences are framed within the context of burdens of care or the care burden. And so it's really, really difficult to get their issues on the agenda as, body autonomy, bodily autonomy, or to get out of that care concept. It's not seen as a rights issue per se, it's seen as a disability management issue, an impairment management issue.
Can I move now to another related topic, and what would you see as the high points or the low points perhaps of the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on the rights of women and girls with disabilities? COVID exposed all the inherent inequality and discrimination experienced by people with disability. And, definitely women and girls with disability. And so, first of all, disability wasn't a focus of the health response to COVID-19 or the economic response to COVID-19 at all. So let alone there being a gender lens on any health response or economic response in terms of women and girls with disability. Yet people with disability were a high-risk group that, because of lots of their living situations in congregate care and or their requirements for daily support, in-home support, left them at risk and vulnerable to COVID. But this wasn't addressed until much later in the progression of the pandemic here in Australia. But it also COVID also highlighted the incidences of violence within congregate care were exacerbated by, the physical distancing rules, the imposition of restrictions within group homes to enforce physical distancing, that, heightened frustration within homes, within group homes and residential facilities, leading to increased risk of resident-on-resident violence, but also staff-on-resident violence. So that was increased, and women would bear the brunt of that. As we know, women experience violence in these situations 3 times more than men with disabilities. So
that would have been a heightened risk for women during COVID. The other thing that came about from a lot of the panic buying was a reduction in access to sanitary items, and so there was forced suppression of menstrual cycles of women, and so women's bodily integrity again was being overlooked in terms of meeting that care burden or the lack of equipment that was available to support the women. So COVID really just magnified all the stuff that happens anyway. Menstrual suppression happens on a daily basis in Australia for women and girls with disabilities. So this just magnified it.
Okay, a number of the violations that you have spoken about are, I'm sure, things that you are taking up in another of your roles that I didn't mention in the introduction. That is the very important role of a member of the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, to which you were elected a couple of years ago, and you now currently serve as a vice chair of the committee. So could you tell us what you think are the main challenges, the opportunities that present themselves to you in your role on that committee and with your leadership role working together with your current and incoming colleagues on that committee?
Well, it's a very interesting time for us to be having this conversation, Andrew, because we are literally having this recorded a day before the elections occur in New York and remotely around the world for the committee, for the next term of the committee. And I am hoping that the results will bring us to gender parity, that we will have 9 women and 9 men. As I indicated earlier, we're famous for being the committee that had 17 blokes and 1 woman for a term, so it would be good to actually reach gender parity. So at the moment we have 6 women and 12 men, so I'm hoping this round of elections will give us 3 more women on the committee at least, and that we can achieve and then maintain gender parity. The other thing I would say about the committee is I think it's important that all members of the committee have an understanding of how the CRPD enlivens intersectionality, how it works technically to put a gender lens on articles, how it gives rise to states having to look at their policies not in a neutral way, but ensuring that disability policy or any policy includes a gender and disability focus. And so it's important that that knowledge is soundly embedded within the committee. And it's really, really important to have the voice of strong women with disability articulating the issues and concerns for women with disability on the committee, and making sure that there's parity in terms of the focus of women's issues within the committee's work. And I mean, we have a general comment, number 3, on women and girls with disabilities. So it's important when we've got a strong convention that gives a strong intersectional focus, we've got a general comment which supports that work, that's then reflected in the jurisprudence that the committee produces, but also in the guidance that we give states, and that states pick up that guidance and work with it domestically.
Thanks. I think we're almost at the end of our discussion today. Sort of my memory, and 25 years after Beijing and reflecting on it, two of my abiding memories of the conference are sloshing through the rain and the mud in the town of Huairou, which was 50 kilometres west of Beijing, where the Chinese government decided to sequester the NGO forum. That was perhaps a little bit, sounds like the struggle for human rights still today, with more rain and more mud. But nonetheless, the other thing I particularly remember is the clarion call from one Hillary Clinton, who came out to the NGO forum and gave a rousing speech on the theme of women's rights are human rights, which I think captured the enthusiasm, the forward momentum, which we are continuing to ride on, I think, but constantly need to reinvigorate ourselves for. So I'm going to ask you, if you wanted to give people an invigorating thought to go away with of something practical that they could do, have you got any suggestions for the audience who will be watching this?
Fundamentally, Andrew, the rights of women and girls with disability are women's rights. We're not just some added-on vulnerable group.
Okay, thank you very much for that final reflection, Rosemary. And thanks from me and for all of those who will be listening, either live, so to speak, at the conference or subsequently to your reflections on thoughts on these many matters relating to the human rights of women, including women with disabilities and girls with disabilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. It's always lovely to chat with you.
Well, what a wonderful conversation that was between two wonderful friends and colleagues of ours. And I think it was so apt to have their presentation happening today on the International Day of People with Disabilities. It's always incredible to listen to Rosemary. Every time you do listen to her, you hear something new, and I think her reflections on the COVID situation and what that's meant specifically for women and girls who live with disabilities was really revealing today. And thanks to them both for such a wonderful presentation, and yes, for joining us in that conversation.